The desert stretched endlessly on both sides of the highway, a vast expanse of nothingness that seemed to swallow time itself. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the cracked asphalt. Jake had been driving for hours, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle in his bones. His old truck rattled like a skeleton, the gas gauge needle teetering dangerously close to empty. Just a little further, he muttered to himself, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. He'd been on the road for what felt like an eternity, trying to outrun his past, but it clung to him like the heat on his skin. He wiped the sweat from his brow and scanned the horizon. Up ahead, a flicker of light broke through the monotonous landscape, a gas station. It appeared out of nowhere, standing alone in the barren desert like a mirage. The fluorescent sign buzzed faintly in the distance, the words "Last Stop Gas" glowing in a pale green. Relief washed over Jake. He could refuel, grab some water, and push on through the night. As he pulled into the station, the gravel crunched under his tires, and the headlights illuminated the small, run-down building. It wasn't much, a single pump, a convenience store with flickering neon lights, and an old rusted sign that creaked in the wind. The windows were dark, and the place looked deserted, but the pump was operational. He stepped out, the hot desert air hitting him like a furnace. Jake felt uneasy as he glanced around. There was something off about this place, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Still, he had no choice. He was nearly out of gas, and the nearest town was miles away. The wind whispered through the emptiness, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent that made him wrinkle his nose. As he filled the tank, Jake noticed movement inside the station. A figure stood behind the counter, their silhouette barely visible through the grimy window. He hadn't seen anyone when he pulled in. With the tank full, Jake hesitated. He was tempted to just leave, but he figured he might as well grab a drink and some snacks. Pushing the door open, a bell above it jingled softly. The inside of the station was dimly lit, casting eerie shadows across the shelves. Dust covered everything, as though it hadn't been touched in years. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old oil and decay. Behind the counter stood an old man, his leathery skin pulled tight over his skull, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. He gave Jake a toothy grin, but there was something predatory in the way his gaze lingered. "Evening," the old man rasped. "Need help finding something?" Jake shook his head, his throat dry. "Just grabbing a drink." The old man's grin widened, and for a moment, Jake swore he saw something glinting in those hollow eyes, something hungry. "Take your time," the man said. "But don't linger too long. Night's coming. Not a good place to be after dark." Jake nodded, feeling a chill crawl up his spine despite the oppressive heat. He grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler, noting that everything seemed strangely dated. The labels on the snacks and drinks were faded, like they belonged in another time. He glanced around, suddenly realizing how unnaturally quiet it was. The hum of the cooler was the only sound, and even it seemed muted. As Jake made his way back to the counter, a noise caught his attention, a faint, rhythmic tapping. He turned toward the back of the store, where a door stood slightly ajar. The sound was coming from beyond it, like someone tapping their fingernails on a hard surface. The old man noticed Jake's curiosity and chuckled, a low, gravelly sound that made Jake's skin crawl. "Best stay away from that door," he said softly, leaning over the counter. "Ain't nothing back there for the living." Jake froze, the words hanging in the air between them. He met the old man's gaze, those sunken eyes staring back at him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. He could feel the pulse of fear in his chest, a primal instinct telling him to leave. But something kept him rooted to the spot, as though the very air in the station was thick with unseen hands, pulling him deeper into its web. Without a word, Jake placed his items on the counter. The old man rang them up slowly, his bony fingers moving with a deliberate slowness that only heightened the tension. "Be on your way now," the old man said, his voice barely a whisper. "And remember, don't stay past dawn." Jake frowned, but before he could ask what the man meant, the door to the station creaked open behind him. A cold gust of wind blew in, sending a shiver down his spine. He turned around, expecting to see the barren desert outside. Instead, a woman stood in the doorway. She was pale, her eyes wide and vacant, as though she wasn't really seeing the world around her. Her clothes were torn and blood-stained, her hair matted with dirt. She stepped into the store, her bare feet leaving faint, bloody prints on the dusty floor. Jake's heart raced, and he backed away instinctively. The old man didn't seem the least bit surprised. In fact, he looked almost pleased. "Another one," the old man muttered, shaking his head. "Poor souls. They never make it." The woman wandered aimlessly down the aisles, her movements slow and mechanical, like a puppet on invisible strings. Jake's mind raced. He wanted to leave, to bolt for the door, and never look back, but his legs refused to move. What happened to her?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. The old man leaned in close, his breath hot and rancid. "She's dead, boy. Died out on that highway, just like all the others. Violent death, too. They always find their way here." Jake's stomach churned. He glanced back at the woman, her lifeless eyes staring blankly ahead as she reached for a can of food. But when her hand passed through it as though it weren't even there, Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What the hell is this place?" he whispered. The old man's grin faded, his face growing solemn. "This here's the last stop for souls like hers. Those who died out on that road, their spirits end up here, stuck between worlds. Some come looking for gas, some for snacks, some just wandering without knowing. But if they don't leave before dawn, they become part of the station. Trapped." Jake felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. He had to get out. He had to leave now. But as he turned toward the door, he saw them, more figures emerging from the desert, slowly making their way toward the station. Men, women, even children, their bodies battered and broken, their eyes hollow and empty. They walked in silence, drawn toward the flickering neon lights like moths to a flame. Jake stumbled backward, his breath coming in short gasps. "No, this isn't real. It can't be real." The old man stepped around the counter, his boots making a dull thud on the floor. "Oh, it's real, all right. And you best leave before you become one of them. Once the sun rises, you'll be stuck here forever serving this place." Jake's mind reeled. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but the evidence was right in front of him. The dead were gathering, their broken bodies shambling closer with each passing moment. "Go," the old man urged, his voice now laced with urgency. "Go while you still can." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He turned and bolted for the door, the bell jangling wildly as he threw it open. He sprinted to his truck, his heart hammering in his chest. The engine roared to life, and he peeled out of the station, gravel flying beneath his tires. In the rearview mirror, he saw the dead standing at the edge of the station, watching him go. The old man stood among them, his grin stretching impossibly wide as the neon sign flickered one last time. As Jake sped down the highway, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the darkness swallowed the desert whole. But the further he drove, the more the fear gnawed at him. He glanced at the gas gauge full, but something wasn't right. The road seemed to stretch on forever. No signs, no towns, just the endless desert. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The headlights pierced through the darkness, illuminating only the road ahead. And then, in the distance, Jake saw it, the faint glow of neon lights. His heart sank. He pulled up to the gas station, the sign buzzing faintly in the night air. "Last stop gas." Jake stared in disbelief, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. How had he ended up back here? He'd been driving straight, hadn't he? He stepped out of the truck, his legs weak beneath him. The station looked exactly the same, as though he'd never left. The door creaked open, and the bell jingled softly as he stepped inside. The old man was waiting for him behind the counter, his grin wider than ever. "Told you not to stay past dawn," the old man said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Jake swallowed hard, his mouth dry as sand. He backed away slowly, but the door swung shut with a loud thud, sealing him in. The old man chuckled, a low, menacing sound that echoed through the station. "Welcome to the crew, boy." As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Jake realized the terrible truth. He was trapped, just like the others, doomed to spend eternity in the gas station, serving the lost souls who wandered in from the highway. And somewhere out in the desert, another traveler would soon find their way to the last stop gas station, unaware of the fate that awaited them if they didn't leave before dawn. But Jake would be there, ready to offer them gas, snacks, and directions, just like the old man before him.